Well, folks, thanks you all for coming. I'll go ahead and introduce myself. We're kind of informal here. This is the living room, as they call it. My name's Jonathan. Like I said, Jonathan Schenkel, and this is my partner, Crystal Wise. We've worked here volunteering with Merrill Gardens for probably a year and a half. So I put up this picture of dominoes. So what do you think of when you think of dominoes? I have little kids. So this picture here, this is what my kids like to do, is set them all up in a line, and then you knock one down, and what happens? All the rest fall. So in retirement, it's a bit like dominoes across these disciplines. And the reason why I talk about the taxes, the investments, the insurance, and the estate planning is it works like dominoes. When you're just working in life, things aren't as connected, but once you're in retirement, what you do in one area affects all the others. You may not realize that when your taxes go up, 2 years down the road, Medicare can actually charge you more money because you earn more money in a previous year. That's called an income-related penalty. And it works like tax brackets. It's basically a secret tax that the government has. So if you have some kind of capital gain liquidation, if you had a rental property that you sold, if you inherit money, things of that nature all affect your taxes. Well, then your taxes is going to affect your insurance by making your Medicare price go up. And there's ways that things, they all flow into each other. Ultimately, estate planning, what we're talking about today, everything bumps into estate planning, right? Because the way that your investments are set up, the way that you have insurance policies set up, and your tax planning for yourself and for the future of your estate is all an aspect of this estate planning. Go ahead and go to the next slide here. So why should we try to take control of our estate planning? A lot of people wind up in a position where they are walking through the consequences of how things were set up in a way that was not intentional. So what we want to do is be proactive rather than reactive. And so we want to try to take control of our estate planning. You've worked hard to save what you've saved and have the kind of retirement that you have. We want to preserve that, and we also want to pass that down to future generations as best we can to bless our children, bless our grandchildren. Those are things that I hear people say frequently. You want to exercise some control of that. You may have a situation with one children who's a saver and one child who's a spender. And if the spender gets money, they're just going to go out and spend it. And so there's ways that we can help with that. You may have a charity that you care about or a charitable cause that you really enjoy supporting. And you may not realize that that's something that we can do as an intentional, proactive part of your estate planning to make an impact in that charitable work. So we can go ahead and move on. All right, so point number one that we're going to cover today is going to be updating your estate planning documents after you move. Now, when you move from one state to another, I heard a couple of you say you were local here in South Carolina before. Did any of you move from out of state here to Merrill Gardens? You did. Okay. And you did as well. Okay. That's very common here when I meet people and do events here. And a lot of times the reason why Jill or the other staff calls me is to help update people's health insurance. So you may have realized when you moved that, your health insurance policy in this state doesn't necessarily transfer over automatically. You actually have to contact the insurance company, make changes. There could be differences in the price. Well, it's the same thing in your estate planning. If you have a POA or you have a will or things like that already established, what works in one state doesn't necessarily work in another. And there may be unintentional consequences there. So you want to be sure to update, at least have reviewed and updated your power of attorney documents, which would be durable, medical, and financial powers of attorney, and then your will, and then have a trust reviewed too if you have a trust. And we're going to cover that later on. You go ahead and go to the next, Crystal. So durable power of attorney, this is a document that is related to financial control. Now, this is most often in regards to becoming incapacitated in one way or another, which is unpleasant to think about. None of us want to think about that. But if medically you cannot respond for some reason or handle your own affairs, what's going to happen to your bills? What's going to happen to your investments? Things of that nature. Who's going to pay your taxes? You need to have somebody designated with a legal document in place to designate that person where there can be an immediate transfer. Oftentimes what we find is people call us, they're asking for help to get this sorted out. after the fact, when something has already happened and it's difficult at that time, it's not immediate. So if you have a durable power of attorney in place, then immediately things are able to transfer over when they need to. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. Next would be a healthcare power of attorney. And then there's something called a living will. Has anyone heard that term before? Living will can also be called an advanced directive. This essentially means, what do you want to happen? Thank you, Shannon. What do you want to happen when you get to the point where you need the basically life-saving medical care to keep you alive? As well as, do you want to give somebody else the authority to help make healthcare decisions on your behalf if you're unresponsive or if you can't make an informed decision yourself? Again, unpleasant to think about, but unfortunately that time comes for most people. And this is something that you want to be proactive about. And so what that is having a power of attorney in place for healthcare. So the first one we talked about, which is durable financial power of attorney, is different than a healthcare power of attorney. So those are two separate documents that you want to have prepared and in place, designating someone to help take care of that for you.
I know that.
All right. Number 4 here. I want to talk about beneficiary designations. Now, most people, when they think of estate planning, most people, when they think of estate planning, they think primarily about a will, as in what happens after you pass away. So the first two things we talked about are both while you're still alive: power of attorney for financial, power of attorney for healthcare. Well, a will is something that we're going to talk about, and it's important, but potentially even more important than a will is your beneficiaries on your financial accounts. Everyone has, I would assume, a retirement account or some kind of brokerage account. Those accounts, by default, you have to select a beneficiary, but the beneficiary you selected 20, 30 years ago may no longer be relevant now. And so you want to check up on that, as well as your bank accounts, checking accounts, saving accounts, life insurance policies. We know typically a life insurance policy, you designate a beneficiary, but also an annuity policy. I don't know if anybody has an annuity policy, but you should have a beneficiary designated there. That's something that you can check up on and make sure it's accurate and it reflects your situation now. The most common thing I see is somebody who's been previously married and is divorced, and their ex-spouse is still the beneficiary on one of their financial accounts or on an annuity policy or something like that. And we don't want to give exes money that we don't have to, right? So let's make sure we have that straightened out. The most important thing to know is that a will goes through probate court, and that can be expensive. It also takes a long time, and it's very public. So we're going to talk more about why that may not be the best thing to do. But if you have beneficiaries listed on your financial accounts, then that supersedes your will. And it's an immediate private exchange. So your money, whether it's a checking account, whether it's an investment account, or an annuity policy, if you have a beneficiary on there, it's usually called a transfer on death. Excuse me. A TOD, transfer on death, or a POD, payable on death. That means that when you pass away, that account automatically becomes the beneficiary's account. There's no having them go to court, wait a year for it to go through probate, have it show in public records. It's an immediate transfer and it becomes their property. And so it's a private and an easy way to transfer those assets, and it supersedes a will, which can be a catch-22 in what I was saying of ex-spouses, being entitled to your money. It doesn't matter if you update your will and say, hey, we're not married anymore, so all of my assets go to my children when I die. If your ex-spouse is still listed as a beneficiary on one of your accounts or that policy, then that money is going to automatically go to them. The will doesn't matter at that point. So that's why these things work together. It's important to update those. So that's basically covered that there. Ensure you have POD or TOD on your account. You can walk into any bank or call up any financial institution that you do business with and ask them for a TOD form. Say, hey, I need to update my beneficiary, the transfer on death, and they will help you update that. All right, this is point number 6. I'm talking about trusts. So what is a trust and why does it make sense, or when does it make sense? So as I just mentioned, when you have a will, A will goes through what's called probate court. Has anybody dealt with parents or relatives and dealing with probate court? So you understand, some of you have had experience with that process. So it takes a while for assets and things to work through probate court.
Take longer than 5 years.
Not commonly, but I've heard some crazy stories. Yeah, I've heard some crazy stories. That's terrible. Excuse me. So it takes time, right? You're at the government's mercy for how long it takes and how many people essentially are in line in front of you for their estate to pass through probate. It costs money, right? There's taxes and fees that need to be paid to the court to be able to have that process play out. But the biggest reason is privacy. Probate is public, and your will and everything that happens in probate court becomes a part of public record. So creditors, any curious people in the public, there's all sorts of people who can see what is going on when your assets go into probate. A trust is a way to avoid all of that. A trust is a legal entity that you actually transfer ownership of those assets into. And so you have privacy, and your affairs have privacy, and it avoids probate court. So like a will goes through probate, a trust does not. A trust will disperse your assets how you decide immediately upon death. And the other thing with a trust is it's a tool for legacy planning, for you deciding, hey, I don't just want, my assets and things to be divided between my 2 kids and they do whatever they want with it. You can say, hey, I care about this. And so I want, $1,000 a year to go to this church or ministry or cause or whatever it may be. Hey, I want this to happen with a share of my assets when I die. Just with a simple will, money and assets will be divided, but a trust is a powerful tool to actually leave a lasting legacy and have control over your assets and how they're dispersed after you pass away. All right, to point number 7 here, I'll talk about organization. Organization is what is really critical. And I like the way that I worded it. So the biggest thing with organization is knowing that everybody who should be a part of the conversation, whether that's children, whether that's siblings, whether that's a trusted friend, who's going to be a part of helping manage things after you're no longer able to or after you pass away, ensuring that they are in the loop, that they know what's going on, that they know what you have, where it is, and where to find that information. Like I said here at the bottom, keep it on the screen, Crystal. The bottom line, a great plan fails if nobody can find it. And my grandparents were a good example of this. My grandparents were you all's parents' generation. People were a bit more secretive by nature. They didn't want all their business out in front of everybody. So my dad, was working when his dad passed away, my grandpa. My dad lives in Virginia, near DC. My grandpa lived in Denver, Colorado. My dad had to essentially take a month off of work to sort out all of my grandfather's financial affairs when he passed away. And he wasn't, wealthy by any means. He was an accountant for the city of Denver, but had retirement accounts at like 7 different institutions. He had money at Edward Jones. He had money at Vanguard. He had money, Charles Schwab, this, that, and the other thing. And when my grandmother passed away a couple of years before that, she was somebody who kept receipts and paper and all this kind of stuff and files all over the place. They found $2,000 or $3,000 of uncashed checks in coat pockets in her closet, in dress pockets in her closet downstairs in the guest room, stock dividend check for, $25 from, Union Pacific Railroad, crumpled up in a suit pocket, stuff like that. So as they were the epitome of people that, were financially successful, had a good life, provided well for their kids, but they did not have their affairs in order. And there was, a year or more after they passed away, my dad was still dealing with this as the executor of their estate, trying to get, a copy of this record to send over here to this company to free up, these funds at this institution. And it was just such a headache. Well, you're grieving the loss of your parents. And so you don't want to put that burden on anybody. And that's where organization comes in, is, even if it's just a simple piece of paper and you tell your siblings or your kids or whoever the person is, hey, when something happens to me, whether it's in the hospital or I pass away, the top desk drawer has everything spelled out. Here's the account number, the institution it's at, you're the beneficiary on the account. It might be fun to find money you didn't know you had down the line. There's a free money website. You can put your name and your information in. I did that one time like a year ago, and I found, $45 that the state of Virginia owed me that I overpaid on my taxes. So there is the government in the Treasury keeps unclaimed assets and things like that. But you would be shocked at the thousands of dollars of unclaimed assets that are out there every single year, simply because people's beneficiaries had no idea they existed. So you want to try to make things easy for those, especially when they're going through a time of grief for losing you. And so that organization really is key. Another thing I put on here is, who are your advisors? Like I said, my grandfather wasn't, rich or anything. But I don't know why. He had 2 or 3 financial advisors. He had an advisor over at Edward Jones. He had an advisor over here. And it was like, do they know each other exist? Do they talk to each other? No, there's no coordination. So what are their names? What's their office number? Things like that. Having all of that just simply spelled out on a piece of paper can save, your heirs from having to dig through, every drawer under the bed and, in the attic and all this, looking for that kind of information. So go ahead, Crystal. Common mistakes to avoid. The biggest one is just simply outdated documents. Is simply, if your POA documents, your will, trust have not been reviewed in 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, then it's really time for a review. You should bring that in and meet with an attorney, an estate law attorney, and get them to look at that. And that's an hour of the attorney's time. And, whatever they charge for that hour. But that could save thousands of dollars in grief of your children or heirs having to try to resolve these things within your estate. In addition to that, let's see, what's another big one? Naming the wrong executor on an account. This is something like I mentioned before, but gosh, this one really surprises me. When somebody has an ex-spouse or somebody has, a stepchild or something like that, the way that these things need to be spelled out as far as beneficiaries go, it matters. Lastly, number 5 there, like I said, nobody likes to talk about it. It's unpleasant, but if you become unable to make decisions for yourself, what is the plan? A lot of people plan for after their death, but they don't plan for their life should they become incapacitated. And so having an idea of, hey, maybe it's not necessarily your oldest child, but hey, this one is, the responsible one. I want them to manage my affairs. Okay, hey, here's the power of attorney's documents. These are up to date and they're ready to go. Like I had mentioned on that slide, if you are in the hospital, needing medical care and unable to respond, the doctors go off of the documents. They want to see the document. They don't just want to talk to your child, in some other state and hear what the child thinks needs to be done. They need to say, hey, where's the durable power of attorney? Who is that person? What is the living will? What is it saying that we should do here, so that they can make informed decisions? So these are the practical things, that nobody wants to get around to doing, but it is important. And your children will thank you later for having that in order. So one final thought here that I just thought to put on, it's not just about the paperwork and having paperwork. It's helping out the people who are going to be going through a season of grief after something happens to you, and making it easier for them to deal with that season of grief by not having to run around, like my dad did, and try to dig out paperwork everywhere and clean up, a big convoluted mess. So it really is about that, so hopefully that is valuable here. I know it's fairly short. I wanted to leave some time for questions, and then I have a 2-sided piece of paper with a little quiz on it that I'm going to give each of you. And the quiz is, just a way to start thinking for yourself, hey, this is what I have, do I have this? Yes or no? I have this, yes or no? Like, oh, I never thought about this. I should have this as a resource to you. And then the 7 main points that I had here on the screen is on the notes there as well.